10:37 the time. Need to know with Jeff Angelo's program. Congress wants to work to protect your kids when they're online. Now, when you say it like that, like this is the goal of Congress, you immediately go, okay, that is a worthwhile goal. We are concerned about our children's online safety. But you're also discerning enough to go, yeah, but what are they specifically going to do? That old saying, the devil's in the details. There is a very thoughtful column on that at nationalreview.com. Congress's well-intentioned efforts to micromanage children's online safety will end poorly. The author of that article is David McGarry, and David is on my Davison Family Dentistry Newsmaker line. Hey, David, how are you? Good morning.
Good morning. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
David, you write in this column that, yes, Congress should prioritize children's safety, but this is a balancing act. What else do they have to consider?
Yeah, definitely. So there's an unfortunate tendency on the right these days, I think, to forget about all sorts of constitutional and economic principles when we start talking about regulating online life. And these proposals in front of Congress are no different. So, for example, one bill that Congress is now considering is called the Kids Online Safety Act. And part of what this bill does is put a burden of care on platforms to mitigate all sorts of risks to children's mental and physical health. And unfortunately, the only possible way for platforms to comply with this bill, should it be passed, would be to moderate and curtail all sorts of legal speech that's going on social media. And I think especially these days, conservatives should be particularly sensitive towards that kind of thing.
Well, and David, one of the things I was really drawn to in your column is that we don't really, it's seemingly to me, these are my words that was a point I think you're making about that we don't look at the digital world like it's the real world, and it looks like all the principles that we expect as Americans don't apply there. Am I right that you're trying to convey that?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. There's an unfortunate tendency towards, as in a bill like the Kids Online Safety Act, to get the government involved in speech regulation online. And then also we see in a lot of markets with other regulatory proposals, we see a lot of Congress people in both parties advocating government involvement in really micromanaging the economics of platforms like Amazon. And again, as free marketeers, as free traders, we should understand that government micromanagement of economics really makes everyone poor. And a lot of people have forgotten those lessons when it comes to looking at big tech.
But of course, David, I can hear a listener saying, so what do you want, David? Just wild, wild west, and my kids get online and, devil beware. I don't know what's going to happen, but that's too bad. We're free market people. That would be the cynic's argument against you. So is there a role, though, for government in all of this?
There is a role for greater enforcement of outstanding criminal activity, which there's actually also at least one proposal in Congress on that front. But I want to make the point that the responsibility for regulating children's online lives falls to their parents. There's actually a lot of tech tools, and Apple is led in this, but there is a lot of tech tools that allow allow parents to monitor and limit what content and how much content their children can see online. And I think it's a mistake to absolve parents of their responsibilities and to push government into micromanaging family life. I think that I certainly think that both parents' rights and parents' responsibilities are very important, and we should be emphasizing and reinforcing those, not shoving governments down families' throats.
And this Kids Online Safety Act, David, I know people are probably thinking, well, it probably covers, the usual suspects, YouTube or Snapchat or TikTok. This is a pretty broad law, isn't it?
Yeah, well, this is actually a big problem with a lot of recent online regulatory proposals we've seen, is that they basically will cover almost any platform or website. And so what we're really talking about, and the stakes are very high here, what we're really talking about is remaking the entire internet I think, to solve a problem that we've seen is mostly limited to even a small number of social media platforms. A lot of times TikTok and Instagram come up in these conversations, but instead we're looking at regulating, again, the vast majority of the internet.
So, and David, again, another thing that you point out in this column on regulating children's online safety and what Congress might do about it is how good these policies seem on the surface. And you're just trying to dig in a little bit further here. So, for example, you point out this Kids Online Safety Act. It doesn't explicitly say that there should be age verification with a website, but it's basically going to make it almost impossible for a website not to institute age verification. Okay, age verification, that sounds logical to me. What might be wrong with that?
So if you're going to mandate age verification or make it unavoidable, really what you're saying is that all users of all ages will have to either submit biometric data or submit government identification documents to websites and social media platforms in order to gain access. So the problem with this, number one, is that it creates a huge data privacy risk when you are forcing people to give their sensitive data to all sorts of different websites from which they could be hacked. Or, I mean, we've seen all sorts of numerous data breaches in recent years. But also the other issue is that people should and do have the right to speak anonymously online. And actually, the Supreme Court has gone through this pretty extensively and found in a case called McIntyre versus Ohio Election Commission that the First Amendment encompasses a right to anonymous speech. And you can go back and read that decision, or you can also just look to the Federalist Papers, in which James Madison and Alexander Hamilton and John Jay wrote under a pseudonym, and they wrote anonymously.
Yeah.
Anonymous speech is hardwired into our nation's tradition of free speech, and I don't think that we should give that up online.
And I got to give you points, David, for bringing in the Federalist Papers and the founders in a tech discussion. I love it. So finally, you talk about, and boy, listeners are very aware of this, that this bill would, this Kids Online Safety Act, it really invests a lot of power in a bureaucracy to implement it. That's always a dangerous thing, isn't it, David?
Yeah, it's terrifying, especially when it comes to speech. One thing that this act would do is empower the Federal Trade Commission and state attorneys general to go after companies that have supposedly violated this duty of care that we talked about. So in effect, what this means is that if, say, New York's Letitia James thought that some generally right-wing content or pro-Second Amendment content was contributing to gun violence, she could theoretically, under this statute, were it passed, sue platforms to get that speech removed. And if that's not a First Amendment violation, I've ever heard of one.
Absolutely. David McGarry, his column that inspired this conversation's on nationalreview.com. It is called Congress's Well-Intentioned Efforts to Micromanage Children's Online Safety Will End Poorly. Thanks, David, very much. Just one of the things that comes to mind in talking to David is we all have views of specific issues where we say, well, maybe there is a government role in that, but every new law, particularly laws that are being implemented by government bureaucracies, is empowering the government over people. And David has this radical concept as he's talking to me about what's the parent's role in all of this? What is the parent's role in all of this? And isn't there a concern that government officials use regulation to implement a political agenda, as he's pointing out late in the conversation? 10:46 is the time. Need to know what Jeff